I want to introduce you to Crystal, a person who advocates for others and advocates for hope and for faith and for goodness and for families. And she was in the Columbine tragedy.
I got under the desk and then they just started coming in the library and opening fire and shooting off bombs on so many people.
That was the first time I had been introduced to Crystal Miller, and she is the person who's saying so many people. She truly understands what it means to be in a very traumatic experience. So Crystal, we are honored and privileged and grateful that we get to welcome you here. And can you give us a response to the movie American Tragedy?
Absolutely. I just want to say thank you so much, Lisa, for having me here and for allowing me to be a part of this conversation. And I truly do believe that this is one of the most important conversations of our time. This understanding of holistic wellness, mind, soul, body, emotions, spirit, and really how we can begin to implement those at a young age, how we can begin to teach young people grounding techniques, resiliency, social emotional learning programs, breathing techniques. All of these things are so vitally important. And I believe the benefits of doing so will be so innumerable. They will be exponential. But I also believe the cost in not doing so will be detrimental to my kids, to their kids, for generations to come. And I believe that now is the time for change. The first time I watched the film, I've watched it now a handful of times, and the first time I watched it, just because I was at Columbine, I was there. I listened to the words that Dylan spoke. I was right there, you know, at the hands of what was taking place, and not for a single second as I was watching that film did I feel any anger or bitterness or frustration with Sue. I had such compassion and such empathy. I just have so much respect for that woman and the bravery that it took to sit in front of the camera, to tell her story, to tell such intimate, sacred pieces of her and Dylan's story. And it just struck me, you know, just as a mother myself of children, just this idea that it feels like it's an indictment on you when something goes wrong with a kid, something that's beyond your control. And it feels like something you've done has gone wrong or you failed in some way. And I just don't believe that that's the case with Sue. And I believe that she just exemplifies beauty and grace, and the fact that she has turned her story around and she's using it to help educate others is literally the most beautiful work that somebody can do, you know. And I just resonated with her story. I too lost a son, not in the same way that she lost Dylan, but I lost a son, and just the loss of a child, there is nothing like that kind of loss, the void, the emptiness that leaves. And so just the compassion that I had for her. And I remember something stuck with me, and still to this day has stuck with me. Sue prayed. She said, God, just take out Dylan. Just take Dylan so that he doesn't hurt anybody else. And I believe that was a prayer that saved my life that day. But I just wanted to kind of briefly share just where I was that day and a little bit of my experience. And of course, there's a whole lot more to it, as you know, but kind of in a nutshell, I really do believe that in our lives that there are defining moments, you know, that they can be fleeting but they're defining moments nonetheless, because as a result, our lives are left forever changed. And as a result, we have this choice to either shrink back in fear, or we can push forward in faith and in hope. And for me, that choice came when I was just 16 years old. I was a junior at Columbine High School. And at that time, at 16 years old, the greatest concern for me at that time was fitting in, was having friends, was being smart and popular and playing sports. And I always felt like I was just average, like I could do none of those things exceptionally well, but I was just kind of sliding by. And that's a really hard thing for a teenager, because you want to be great. And I just felt like I was always just not quite good enough. I got good grades, but I felt like I had to work harder than everybody else. And I played sports, but I was not the MVP. I was like one with the best smile or best attitude, not really what you're looking for when you're playing sports, you know? And really just always looking for more popularity, more. And on April 20th, 1999, I would discover what really matters, what's really most important in life. And I remember that morning I woke up and I knew that something was strange about the day. In fact, I remember thinking that there was something bad that was going to happen. I know that sounds strange, but that thought was gone as quickly as it came. And I got ready for the day. Of course, I was late, as I always was. And as I was driving to school that day, I realized that I had a really important test that I had to study for. And I didn't have much margin in my day, but I knew that I had my lunch hour. So I determined I would go to the library to study, but went on with you know, the morning, and everything seemed pretty normal. I think there were warning signs, kind of odd occurrences now looking back, but I didn't pay attention to those. Nobody did. Why would we? Because no one knew what was about to happen. Excuse me. And I just remember there was just a lot of excitement in the air because we had prom the weekend before. And I even had one of those old disposable camera, you know, and I was taking pictures because I wanted to finish off the roll from prom and get it developed. That kind of gives you some context of time, right?
Yes.
But I was taking pictures and someone even said, "Hey, Crystal, what are you doing? This isn't the last day of school. Why are you taking pictures?" And now looking back at comments like that, I thought, man, that is really bizarre. And about 11:15, the lunch bell rang, and my friends and I typically went out to eat because we had an open campus and could kind of come and go as we pleased. But on this day, I convinced two of my friends by the name of Seth and Sarah to come with me to the library so that I could study. And they agreed. They really didn't push back on that at all. And so we showed up to the library, and typically the library was filled with so many students, making it kind of difficult to find a place to sit. But we chose a table in the center section of the library because it was more empty that day. And we had only been there a couple of minutes, just unpacking, kind of settling in, catching up on one another's days. And suddenly there was just chaos that broke out in and around the school. And I remember looking to the hallway and I saw students running with looks of panic and terror on their faces. And it looked as though they were running away from something, but I couldn't exactly see what it was. And about that time, Seth kind of jumped up and he went over the windows that overlooked the back of our school to see if anything was happening. He came back and he said, "Hey, nothing to worry about. I'm sure it's a senior prank. I'm sure it's some kind of something for drama club." And I really wanted to believe Seth, and I think Seth wanted to believe Seth. But a teacher came running through the doors and she was screaming at us. She said, "Get under your tables. There's boys, they're shooting guns. They have bombs, hide under your tables." And at the same time, she was calling the police to tell them to come quickly. We really didn't know what to do or how to respond because nothing like this had really ever happened. I mean, a few small things in the peripheral, but nothing to this magnitude. And so we did so. We kind of got underneath of our tables that didn't offer a whole lot of protection, kind of pulled in the chairs as closely as we could. And I remember Seth, you know, just kind of holding on to me, just kind of sheltering my body with his own. And just down the hall, we started to hear loud explosions and popping noises, and they were coming closer and they were getting louder. And I knew deep down that they were headed for the library. And I think Seth really realized the same thing in that moment because he said to me, he said, "Crystal, I promise that I will take a bullet for you." And when he said those words to me, I knew that I wasn't going to make it out of there alive. I knew that at 16 years old, I was facing the reality of my own death. And so I did the only thing I could think to do. I cried out and I said, "God, if you're real, God, make us invisible. Get us out of here. I'll quit partying. I'll quit drinking." I was making a lot of really poor choices at that point. And I said, "God, just give me a second chance and my life is yours." And with that, the two killers came into the room and they screamed at all of us, "Everybody get out, get out, get out, get up from underneath of your tables." And of course, none of us did. And they, for the next 7.5 minutes, began their killing rampage. And those 7.5 minutes felt like an eternity. It felt like time absolutely stood still. And I remember it really was kind of what they talk about, your life flashing before your eyes. I saw all my past choices that I had made, wishing I had a do-over. I saw my hopes and my dreams for my future literally slipping through my fingers, knowing those dreams would never be realized. I saw faces of my family and friends that I loved so dearly, but at 16, never told them how much I loved or cared about them. You know, you think you're invincible, you think you have every day for the rest of your life to share those messages. And I just kind of closed my eyes and I waited and I listened to the horror unfold for those 7 minutes as they gunned down their victims based on the way that they looked, the color of their skin, if they were overweight, if they wore glasses. They were even targeting students, asking them if they believed in God and pulling the trigger, killing them when they answered yes. And at one point, as I was huddled there with Seth, I heard one of them yell out, "Hey, you in the white hat." And I remembered Seth was wearing a white hat and he pulled it off and he held it there between us. And I just remembered waiting for a bullet to go through him and then through me. But nothing happened. The shooting just continued and I was filled with so much panic and so much fear, every fiber of my body just shaking uncontrollably. The strobe lights going off and the fire alarms just raging. And I couldn't even breathe. I was so afraid to take my next breath because I didn't know what the next moment would hold. And at that point, I was actually chewing a piece of gum. And it's so distinct because I remember reaching into my mouth and thinking it wasn't a matter of if, but when I got shot, I didn't want to choke on my gum. So I took it out and I thought, okay, now I'm safe. You know, at least when I get shot, I'm not going to choke. And with that, the two boys began making their way up the center section and they were pushing in chairs to get through. They had already killed several people behind us in the section. And they first turned to the table that was right next to us, just a few feet away. And they were mocking him, making fun of him because he wore glasses, and they ended his life. And then they turned their attention to our table and they pushed a chair in underneath, and my body was lying right where they were standing, their boots just inches from my body. And I just remember I could feel them standing there. I could hear their voices so clearly. And they were using our table to kind of collect inventory of what was left of their weapons and their guns and kind of realized they were running low. And one of them took out a knife and said, I've always wanted to stab someone to death. And so just kind of waited for a new variation of my death at that point. And as I clenched my body and kind of waited for death to come, nothing happened. They said they were going to go reload and they were going to come back, but they promised to kill those of us who are still alive. And so for the first time in what seemed like forever, the shooting stopped and it gave us a quick opportunity to get up and escape before they returned. And Sarah and I stayed under the table still holding on to one another. We had been safe up until that moment. But Seth realized we weren't behind him. He came back, he pulled us from the table and he said, run, leave everything behind, just get out of here as quickly as possible. We ran towards the exit and it looked like a war zone had taken place in there. And I remember still holding my gun thinking it's holding me back. It was like that nightmare where you can't run and you can't scream and you can't move. And I dropped it and I took off outside. And just a few yards from the school, there was a police car. There were no police officers, just mostly students who had been very badly wounded. And there was just pools of blood and people writhing in pain and ripping off clothes to put pressure on people's wounds. And I just lost control. I became hysterical and I was screaming and I was hyperventilating and really close to actually like feeling like I was having a heart attack because everything was shutting down. I couldn't use my body. I couldn't move. I couldn't do anything. And police began coming and taking the most wounded away. And I was separated from Seth and Sarah, dropped off in a field just behind Columbine, just kind of left cemented in a place. I didn't know where to go. I didn't know who to trust. I had lost my friends. And a camera came and they started asking me questions. And that was the clip that is in American Tragedy as I'm crying and I'm trying to figure out, and so many people that were left in the school, so many people that were there lying on the floor.
After he died, I woke up remembering that day of how this child was going to bring me sorrow.
We all got under the desk and then they just started coming in the library and opening fire and shooting off bombs on so many people.
We were getting word that Leewood Elementary School is locked down.
If you were just joining us, two young men apparently dressed in long black trench coats opened fire about an hour and a half ago at a high school just outside of Denver in Littleton, Colorado. At least 3 students have been injured and possibly as many as 8. We know that victims have been taken to area hospitals. 1 student has apparently been critically injured, and we know that one of the victims may be an adult woman. There is a huge presence of police and sheriff's.
I hadn't even begun to process, and wouldn't for quite some time, everything that I had experienced in there. But later we came to find out that the library was the scene of the most intense violence that day, that 10 of the 13 were killed inside of the library, also Dylan and Eric, and 12 of the 24 were wounded there in the library as well. And so, you know, just have learned a lot of lessons from that time and learned a lot of things. But I think one of the things I've learned is that we never know the character that we possess or the resiliency that is within us until we're faced with something like that. And, you know, as I said, it's been quite a journey. It's been quite just a amazing 21 years. And obviously I would have avoided it if possible, but in doing so, I would have not seen the ways that it's impacted, the ways that it has changed my life, the ways that it has given me the opportunity to choose hope every single day. And that's why it was my defining moment, because really that was a gift that I was given right there, that I could either choose to give up, to be bitter and angry and kind of throw in the towel on the rest of my life, or I could choose to live. I could choose hope. And for me, I didn't feel like there was another option. I couldn't change what had happened to me, but what I could do is change how I was going to respond to it. And so that's a little bit of a nutshell, kind of been my journey. And I started almost immediately speaking, writing, you know, just sharing a message. And for me, I always wanted to share a message of hope, but also it was one of urgency to see these things end. But as school shootings and mass shootings in general started to become more commonplace, and they started to really increase with such intensity, I kind of started to step into more of an advocacy role where I was really trying to be there to respond to other people who had gone through something similar to what myself and my community had gone through. And that's a hard thing to do. You know, it's a hard thing to hope for so long. Hey, maybe my message is making a difference. Oh, wait, it doesn't seem to be making a difference at all. And now I'm trying to respond to all these other people. And as Jose and I were talking about before the call, you know, to be a part of a club that none of us wish that any of us would ever have to be a part of. And that is what this club is, this ever-growing club of survivors. And, you know, last year in 2019, there were more mass shootings than there were days of the year. And I know that resulted in some 400 plus deaths in 2019 alone. So if you think about those statistics, you think everyone you know will be affected by mass shooting in some way or another. But my heart is right now, okay, what about those who already have? You think about Route 91 in Las Vegas, Nevada, and you think about the fact that 22,000 people were there immediately impacted by this life-altering trauma. And that doesn't even begin to include the secondary trauma of friends and families of those individuals. I mean, it's just, those numbers are absolutely astonishing. And so that was, you know, as I said, for a long time, I was speaking, I was traveling, I was writing, doing all of these things. But as an individual, your reach is only so far, your platform only so far reaching. And so I was able to link arms with the On-Site Foundation and brilliant, amazing, compassionate professionals such as Miles and so many others, and to link arms to do something greater. And that's kind of really the vision behind Triumph Over Tragedy. I personally have seen many of acquaintances and friends lose their lives to addiction, to suicide. And Miles even spoke earlier of our common friend, Austin Eubanks. And, you know, watching what happened with Austin's life. Austin, he was also in the library with me, and he was injured and he lost his best friend. And because of his injuries and his emotional pain, he developed an opioid addiction. And even as Miles stated, he was an incredible, remarkable individual with such a message, and he was making such an impact in the world. And to ultimately see him succumb to that addiction was heartbreaking. And I too felt compelled to do something. And there is no coincidence that brought Miles and myself and Laura and everybody who is a part of the On-Site Foundation and a part of Triumph Over Tragedy together at the perfect time. I believe so much of my work since Columbine is really a culmination of what we're seeing now. And so Triumph Over Tragedy was birthed, and Triumph Over Tragedy is a week-long therapeutic, it's a trauma-informed therapeutic program where people can come, and it's designed specifically, curated for survivors of mass violence, to have this emotional wellness kind of education, trauma information, coupled with a variety of different modalities, using some of the most incredible experts in the field of trauma, but also using community, because we believe that healing takes place in the context of community, that we can offload our pain when we are in community with one another. And so that is what Triumph Over Tragedy is. And as you heard Miles say, it's completely free, it's scholarshiped, so that everybody has access to the kind of help that they deserve, regardless of their race, of their gender, of their socioeconomic status. Because I know for me personally, I had an amazing trauma therapist. I had amazing help at my fingertips and resources, but it's alarming how many people do not have access to the same thing, who do not have the even just the funds to be able to get this kind of help. And so that's why we believe it's so important to create a new ripple effect. For far too long, we have seen the ripple effect of death and of destruction. And so we want to see a new ripple effect, one of hope, one of emotional freedom, one of just something that creates change, even as you were talking about, Lisa, a new, beautiful existence for people. Because honestly, until we know better, we can't do better. And so each of us, we each learn, and then each one teaches one. And so I love that model, that as we learn to get emotionally healthy ourselves, then we get to pass that on to other people in our spheres of influence, whether that's at our homes, whether that's in our workplace, in our communities, in our schools. We really can't even grasp how big and how far we can reach, with that. And so anyway, we had, as Miles said, back in March, we had 40 survivors come. And it was, I experienced courage on a grand scale. I mean, I saw these 40 survivors come and show up, because I believe that courage isn't the absence of fear or even discomfort, but it's looking that fear and that discomfort in the face and saying, not today. I'm going to show up. I'm going to do the hard work. I'm going to let the walls and the defenses come down, and I'm going to press in and do the hard work. And it's hard. It's hard, but it's so worth it. And we've seen this in so many people who are a part of this program. Some of them have said they feel like themselves for the first time in a long time. Some of them just say they feel for the first time in a long time. You know how amazing that is, just to feel again and not to feel numb. And some of them say they have a renewed sense of hope and purpose and meaning as a result of the program. And others say, hey, we've got a long way to go, but now we have resources and we have tools and we have community to do that with. And I think that is such a beautiful gift that we're not the end all be all to healing from trauma of a mass shooting. We're a stepping stone to in that journey, and everybody's journey is different. It looks different. But it's just kind of to be the first stepping stone or a part of the continuation of that healing process. And so it's such a high honor for me to be the chairperson of our Survivor Council, but also just to continue creating a better and better program for survivors everywhere, because this is just the beginning. It's not the end, as you said, Lisa. This is just the beginning for us. But I also think it lends itself to what we're talking about in the film, is that yes, we know so much about trauma. We know the research, we know the effects of trauma on the brain and on the body, and we know it can be healed. There's such hope in just knowing that trauma can be healed, but we also know that there are preventative measures that we can be taking right here and right now so that we can make great strides together in seeing, just less of this trauma altogether affecting people on a global scale. It's really kind of a message for all people who've gone through any kind of trauma, not specifically just survivors of mass shootings, but trauma has so many different faces. And I think it's so important to speak to all of that, especially right now during this time of COVID and quarantine and all this uncertainty, because it can feel so scary and uncertain. And, and I think sometimes when we feel afraid, we lose our power to choose. But when we step into recovery and we start to do the work and we use the tools in our tool belt and we practice grounding and mindfulness and body movement, resiliency, and the things we learn through social, emotional, programs and learning, is we get that power to choose back. And choice is everything, especially right now that we have the choice to really choose hope over fear and hope over the doubt and the anxiety in these uncertain times right now. And I believe that when there is hope, there is life, and hope is everything. It's such an important message. Where there is hope, there is life. And I want people to understand that hope is a force that is stronger or greater than the greatest traumas that we face. That hope, I really truly believe we are hardwired to hope, not for death, and that trauma and the things that try to be taken from us, they don't get the last say, that hope has the last say. And for me, that hope is found in my relationship with Jesus and his unshakable promises. And that's something I believe. Not everybody believes that, and that's okay. But for me, it's been paramount in my own healing journey. And I have seen Jesus bring joy unspeakable, and I have seen him restore my life in ways I never thought possible, and bring new meaning and purpose to my life. And for that, I cling to that. It was hard for me at such a young age to really try and wrap my mind around that this is a world marked with such loss of dreams and loss of innocence and loss of trust and loss of my own friends. But when I came to the end of myself and I came to what I thought was the final moments of my life, I really clung to the hope that I found in Jesus, knowing that there's no force on this earth, there's no evil so great, there's no destruction so big, there's nothing that can undo what God has done for me in the life and the death of Jesus. And so for me, I've become this warrior of hope. I want people to know that there is hope, to know that it doesn't end there, that trauma, again, doesn't have the last word. And specifically for survivors and specifically for people who've gone through trauma, I think I want you to know, I speak to you right now, you are known and you are seen and you are heard and you are valued. Because so often when we walk through trauma, it seems as though the rest of the world moves on and you're left standing in place. You're isolated, you're alone, you're afraid. And you start to look at other people's trauma and you kind of compare it. Well, hey, what I went through isn't as bad as what they went through. And you start to minimize it. But I want you to know that your story, whatever it is, your story matters. And I don't want you to feel like you're strange or you're broken. If you're feeling these feelings feelings of sadness or depression or worry or grief or anxiety or loneliness or guilt or anger or hopelessness. Because I think so often there's this lie that says you have to be fixed. Something in you is wrong, but I want you to know it's normal. You are so completely normal. And I think that that's something that people don't understand. This is a journey and it is a process, and it's your journey and it's your process, and it will take as long as it takes for you, regardless of what anybody else says. And I want you to know too that even as I said earlier, that there's hope. And again, where there's hope, there is life. And I believe that hope is peace in our chaos, and it's beauty in our ashes, and it's light in our darkness, and it's certainty it is certainty in our uncertainty. And I just want people to really walk away knowing and holding on and knowing that hope is not some system to be implemented. It's not some pipe dream that's beyond your grasp. It is real, and it is tangible, and it is yours for the taking. And just if you're feeling some of these emotions and some of these difficult things that feel painful, it doesn't mean something's wrong with you. They're screaming loudly so that they can be addressed, because you are worth it. Your healing and your recovery is worth it. And so the moment that you recognize, okay, I'm worth this, I can do this, I also want you to know that you're not alone, that there's so many caring individuals out there right here. Lisa, Jose, I know countless people who are saying you're not alone. They're cheering you on the sidelines, saying you've got this, you've got this. And it isn't easy, but it is entirely worth it. And I believe that when we really start to step into that and we walk that out, that we begin to discover what it looks like to not just be victims, but victors, and not just to kind of survive, but to thrive. And ultimately, I believe that that's the message of American Tragedy, that we get to live vibrant lives that are beautiful and that can change this world. And yes, we go through difficult times. I mean, suffering is a part of all of our stories. It's so intricately woven into each and every one of our stories, but it's really what we're going to do with that can change the world.